The transport ship's stellar wind shook like a leaf in a storm. Jake Peterson held tight to his seat as sparks flew from the control panels around him. The ion storm had caught them off guard, and now they were falling toward an unknown planet. "Emergency. Landing procedures now," shouted Commander Zethic, his reptilian scales turning a dark green color that Jake had learned meant fear. The alien's clawed hands moved fast over the controls, but nothing seemed to work right. Jake looked around at his crewmates. Lisa Morgan, the ship's botanist, was strapped in across from him. Her face was pale but calm. She always stayed cool when things went bad. Next to her, Dr. Velix clicked his mandibles together in panic. The insect-like alien's 6 arms waved around as he tried to reach different emergency buttons. Navigator Quinn floated near the ceiling, his gaseous form flickering like a candle in the wind. The ethereal being's usual bright blue glow had turned a sickly yellow color. "Hull breach on deck 3. Dr. Velix's voice came out in sharp clicks. "We're losing atmosphere." Jake unbuckled himself and moved toward the emergency controls. His human hands might not be as fast as alien claws, but he knew these systems well. He had fixed them many times before. "Jake, stay in your seat," Commander Zethic hissed. "The gravity generators are failing." But Jake was already at the control panel. He rerouted power from the failing engines to the emergency landing thrusters. The ship's descent slowed just a little. Through the cracked viewport, he could see the planet's surface rushing up to meet them. It was a desert world. Red sand stretched, as far as he could see, broken only by rocky hills and strange twisted plants that looked like they belonged in a nightmare. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and purple. "Impact in 30 seconds. Zethic called out. Jake made it back to his seat just as the ship hit the ground. The impact threw him forward against his restraints. Metal groaned and twisted. Something exploded in the engine room. Then everything went quiet except for the hiss of escaping air. Jake opened his eyes. His head hurt, but he was alive. Around him, the others were starting to move. Lisa was checking a cut on her forehead. Dr. Velix was on his back, his legs waving in the air as he tried to flip over. Navigator Quinn had condensed into a tight ball near the floor. "Sound off, everyone," Jake said, unbuckling his harness. "Who's hurt?" "Minor injuries only," Zethic replied, though his voice sounded shaky. "But the ship is finished. Main engine is dead. Life support is failing." Jake helped Dr. Velix get back on his feet. The insect alien's compound eyes looked around nervously. "How long can we survive here?" he asked. "That depends on what we can find," Lisa said, standing up slowly. She moved to one of the emergency lockers and opened it. "We have emergency rations for maybe 2 days after that. She didn't finish the sentence. They all knew what happened when the food ran out. Jake walked to the broken viewport and looked out at the alien landscape. The sun was almost gone now, and the first stars were appearing in the sky. The temperature was dropping fast. He could see his breath starting to fog. "We need to secure the ship first," he said. "Make sure we can keep warm tonight, then we figure out food and water." "Food and water?" Dr. Velix's voice rose higher. "Look at this place. It's a wasteland. Nothing can grow here." But Jake was already studying the strange plants he had seen during the crash. Even in the dim light, he could make out several different types. Some were thick and fleshy like earth cacti. Others were low and spreading with tough, stringy leaves. A few had what looked like seed pods. "Actually," he said, "I think we might be okay." The others stared at him like he had lost his mind. "Okay?" Zethic's scales turned an even darker green. "We're stranded on a dead world with no food, no water, and no way to call for help." "The emergency beacon is still working," Lisa said, checking. Another panel. "But the nearest patrol route is 2 weeks away." 2 weeks! Dr. Velix began clicking rapidly. "We'll be dead in 4 days." Jake pulled on his jacket and headed for the airlock. "I'm going to take a look around before it gets too dark." "Jake, no," Lisa called after him. "The air might be toxic." "We haven't run tests yet." But Jake was already cycling through the airlock. The air outside was thin and cold, but breathable. He could smell something like sage and copper. The gravity was a little lighter than Earth normal, making each step feel bouncy. He walked a few meters from the ship and knelt down next to one of the spreading plants. Its leaves were thick and waxy, designed to hold water. He broke off a small piece and sniffed it. It smelled bitter but not dangerous. Behind him, he heard the others arguing through the ship's comm system. "The human has lost his mind," Zethik was saying. "He's going to poison himself." "Jake knows what he's doing," Lisa defended him. "He survived worse than this." "Worse than this?" Dr. Felix clicked. "When has any of us been stranded on a dead world?" Jake smiled and put the plant piece in his pocket. These aliens were smart and had amazing technology, but they had forgotten something important. Sometimes the old ways worked better than the new ones. He spent another 10 minutes collecting samples of different plants before the cold drove him back inside. The others watched him nervously as he sorted through his collection. "Did you find anything?" Lisa asked. "Maybe," Jake said. "I'll know better tomorrow when we can run some tests." That night, they shared the emergency rations equally. The food was bland but filling. Jake noticed that his alien crewmates ate very little, trying to make their portions last. He ate his full share and felt fine. As the others settled down to sleep, Jake lay awake thinking about the plants outside. He had grown up on a farm before joining the space service. His grandfather had taught him about wild plants and how to survive in the wilderness. The aliens might have forgotten these skills, but Jake remembered tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for the first time since the crash, Jake felt hopeful. The desert might look dead, but he knew better. Life found a way to survive in the strangest places. He just had to remember how to find it. The second day started with bad news. Jake woke up to find Dr. Felix bent over the food locker, his compound eyes reflecting the dim emergency lights. "The rations are almost gone," the insect alien said, his voice full of worry. "Someone ate?" "More than their share." Jake sat up and stretched. He had slept well despite the hard floor. Around him, the others were stirring slowly. Commander Zethik looked worse than yesterday. His scales had lost their shine and his movements were stiff. "Nobody ate extra," Jake said. "We're just bigger eaters than you thought." Navigator Quinn floated down from the ceiling where he had been sleeping. His gaseous form looked thinner than usual, like smoke that was starting to fade away. "By tomorrow night, we will have no food left," Quinn said in his whisper-soft voice. "Then we begin to die." Lisa opened her portable lab kit and began setting up tests on the plant samples Jake had collected. "Let me check these specimens," she said. "Maybe we can find something edible." Jake picked up one of the thick, waxy leaves he had gathered. It looked like a cross between a cactus pad and a lettuce leaf. He sniffed it again, still bitter, but not dangerous. "Jake, don't," Lisa warned. "We don't know what those plants might do to you." But Jake was already taking a small bite. The leaf was tough and bitter, like chewing on a piece of leather soaked in vinegar. But it was food. He could feel his body recognizing the nutrients. "Spit it out!" Dr. Felix clicked frantically. "It could be poison." Jake swallowed and took another bite. "Tastes terrible, but it's not going to kill me." The alien stared at him in horror. Commander Zethik's scales turned almost black. "You've just signed your own death warrant," he said. "Maybe," Jake said, taking another bite. "But I don't think." So, while Lisa ran her tests, Jake went outside to explore more of the area around the ship. The desert stretched out in all directions, but it wasn't as empty as it had looked from space. Now that he knew what to look for, he could see life everywhere. There were the spreading plants with their waxy leaves, cactus-like growths with thick stems full of water, twisted shrubs that looked dead but had green wood underneath their bark. And everywhere, growing between the rocks, were small plants that looked like grass but felt more like wire. Jake knelt down and pulled up one of the grass-like plants. The roots were thick and starchy, like small potatoes. He brushed off the dirt and took a bite. It was bland but filling. "This is actually not bad," he said to himself. He spent the morning mapping out the different types of plants within walking distance of the ship. By noon, he had identified at least 6 different species that might be edible. Some were better than others, but all of them had potential. When he came back inside, he found the others in a meeting. They stopped talking when they saw him. "We were discussing rationing," Commander Zephyr said. "If we stretch what we have left, we might survive until rescue comes. Or we might just die slower," Jake said, sitting down with his collection of plants. "How are those tests coming, Lisa?" Lisa looked up from her equipment. Her face was troubled. "The chemical analysis is complete. Most of these plants contain compounds that would be toxic to Corthony physiology," she said, nodding toward Zephyr. "The alkaloids would shut down his nervous system." "What about the others?" Jake asked. "Dr. Velix's species can't process the cellulose. It would just pass through his system without providing nutrition. And Navigator Quinn's energy matrix can't break down solid matter at all." "But what about humans?" Jake asked. Lisa was quiet for a moment. "For humans, most of these plants appear to be edible. Not pleasant, but edible. Your digestive system can handle the compounds that would poison the others." The silence that followed was heavy. Jake could feel the weight of their stares. "So you're saying," Dr. Velix said slowly, "that the human can eat food that would kill the rest of us?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Lisa replied. Jake picked up one of the wiregrass plants and bit into the root. It crunched between his teeth like a raw carrot. "Then I guess I'm not going hungry." The third day was when things got really bad. The emergency rations were completely gone. Jake had eaten his last official meal the night before, but he had been supplementing with the local plants all day. He felt fine. The others were not doing so well. Commander Zephyr moved slowly, his proud military bearing reduced to a careful shuffle. Dr. Velix had stopped his nervous clicking and now sat very still, trying to conserve energy. Navigator Quinn had condensed himself into a tight ball near the warmest part of the ship. "How are you still walking around?" Zephyr asked Jake, his voice weak. Jake was chewing on a piece of cactus stem. The inside was slimy and tasted like soap, but it was full of water and nutrients. "I'm eating," he said simply. "Eating what?" Dr. Velix's voice was barely a whisper. Jake held up the cactus. "This and the grass roots. And those berries I found this morning." "Berries?" Lisa looked up from where she was lying on the floor. "You found berries? Small ones, blue, taste like sour cherries?" Jake pulled a handful from his pocket. "Want to try them?" "Are they safe for humans?" she asked. "Only one way to find out," Jake said, popping one in his mouth. "They're not killing me so far." He offered the berries to Lisa. She took one and bit into it carefully. Her face scrunched up at the sour taste, but she swallowed it. "It's food," she said after a moment. "Not good food, but food?" By evening, Jake had eaten several different types of plants. He was starting to get a feel for which ones were most nutritious and which ones just filled his stomach. The berry bush were the best find. They were packed with sugar and vitamins. The aliens watched him eat with a mixture of amazement and despair. They couldn't understand how he was not only surviving, but actually seemed to be getting stronger. "This is impossible," Zephyr said. "No civilized being should be able to eat such things." "Maybe that's the problem," Jake said, crunching on another root. "Maybe being civilized made you forget how to survive." "We have technology," Dr. Velix protested weakly. "We have science. We have ships that can cross the galaxy." But you can't eat a weed," Jake pointed out. That night, Jake lay awake listening to the sounds of his crewmates. Their breathing was shallow and labored. Navigator Quinn flickered like a candle in the wind. Dr. Velix's chitin was starting to look dull and brittle. Commander Zethic's scales had lost all their color. They were dying, and there was nothing Jake could do about it. Their bodies simply couldn't process the food that was keeping him alive, but maybe Lisa was right. Maybe there was a way to make the plants edible for the others. He had seen her working with her equipment, trying to break down the plant compounds into something the aliens could digest. Tomorrow, he would have to try harder. Not just to survive, but to save his friends. Outside, the desert wind howled through the rocks, but Jake wasn't afraid. He had food, he had water, and he had hope. That was more than the others had. He closed his eyes and planned his next days. Foraging. There were more plants to find, more food to gather. The desert was harsh, but it was also generous to those who knew how to look. His grandfather had been right. Life always found a way. The fourth day began with a crisis. Jake woke up to find Commander Zethic collapsed on the floor, his breathing shallow and irregular. The proud alien warrior who had commanded respect throughout the galaxy now looked like a dying lizard. "Commander!" Jake rushed to his side. Zethic's scales were completely colorless now, like old parchment. His eyes were dull and unfocused. I cannot stand," Zethic whispered. "My strength is gone." Across the room, Dr. Velix had not moved from his position against the wall. His compound eyes were closed, and his 6 arms hung limp at his sides. Only the slight rise and fall of his chest showed he was still alive. Navigator Quinn was barely visible now, just a faint shimmer in the air near the ceiling. His gaseous form had become so thin that Jake could see right through him. "This is bad," Lisa said. She was the only other one still moving, but she was weak too. "They're entering the final stages of starvation." Jake had eaten well that morning. He had found a new type of plant that grew in the shade of the rocks. Its leaves were thick and meaty, like spinach, but tougher. He had also discovered that if he cooked the wiregrass roots over a small fire, they became much more palatable. "There has to be something we can do," he said. "Some way to make the plants digestible for them." "I've been working on that," Lisa said, pointing to her lab equipment. "But the chemical processes are too complex. I would need a full laboratory, not just a portable kit." Jake looked around the crashed ship. Pieces of machinery were scattered everywhere. Broken circuits, damaged computers, twisted metal. But maybe, just maybe, there was something he could use. "What if we don't try to change the plants?" he said. "What if we change how we prepare them?" "What do you mean?" Jake was already moving toward the wreckage of the ship's galley. "The food processors were smashed, but some of the components might still work. My grandfather used to tell stories about the old days on Earth, before modern food processing. People found ways to make anything edible if they were hungry enough." He pulled out a twisted piece of metal that had once been part of the ship's protein synthesizer. It was damaged, but the basic heating elements were still intact. "Help me build something," he said to Lisa. "A way to break down the plant matter into something simpler." "Jake, I'm not sure that's going to work." The alien. "Digestive systems are just too different from ours." "Maybe, but we have to try." They spent the next several hours working together. Jake used his engineering skills to build a crude processing unit from salvaged parts. Lisa used her scientific knowledge to identify which plant compounds might be broken down into simpler nutrients. Meanwhile, the aliens grew weaker by the hour. Commander Zethic had not spoken since the morning. Dr. Velix's breathing became more labored. Navigator Quinn flickered like a dying light bulb. "Please," came a weak voice from the floor. It was Dr. Velix, barely conscious. "If you have any food, anything at all. Jake felt his heart break. These beings had traveled across the galaxy. They had science and technology beyond human imagination. But they were dying because they couldn't eat weeds. "I'm working on it," Jake said. "Just hold on a little longer." He went outside to gather more plants. The desert was hot now, and the sun beat down mercilessly. But Jake had learned to work with the environment. He knew which plants grew in the shade and stored water. He knew which ones were most nutritious and which ones were just filler. As he worked, he thought about the differences between species. Humans had evolved as omnivores, able to eat almost anything. They had survived ice, ages and droughts and famines by adapting to whatever food was available. But these aliens had become specialists. They had evolved to eat specific things in specific ways. That specialization had made them powerful in their own environments. But it had also made them vulnerable. When Jake returned to the ship, he found Lisa trying to give water to Commander Zethic. The alien's tongue was swollen and his eyes were sinking into his skull. "How long do they have?" Jake asked quietly. "Maybe a day," Lisa said. "Maybe less." Jake looked at his jury-rigged processing unit. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. He began feeding plant matter into the machine. watching as it broke down the tough fibers and bitter compounds. "What are you making?" Lisa asked. "Soup," Jake said, "the most basic food in the universe." The machine worked slowly, grinding and heating and filtering. After an hour, it produced a thin, greenish liquid that smelled terrible but might be digestible. Jake took a small sip first. It tasted like bitter water with a metallic aftertaste. But it didn't seem dangerous. "Let me test it first," Lisa said. "No." "Time," Jake said. He knelt down beside Commander Zethic. "Commander, can you hear me?" Zethic's eyes fluttered open. "Jake? I have something for you to try. It might help." Jake lifted the alien's head and carefully poured a small amount of the liquid into his mouth. Zethic swallowed reflexively, then coughed. What is it?" he asked. "Food," Jake said simply. "I hope." They waited. Minutes passed. Commander Zethic's breathing seemed to steady slightly. His scales began to show just a hint of color. I think I feel a little stronger," Zethic said. Jake quickly prepared more of the liquid and gave it to Dr. Velix. The insect alien was almost unconscious, but he managed to swallow a few spoonfuls. Navigator Quinn was the hardest to feed. His gaseous form couldn't take solid or liquid food normally. But Jake had an idea. He heated the processed plant matter until it created a nutritious vapor, then used the ship's ventilation system to distribute it where Quinn was floating. Slowly, very slowly, the ethereal being began to solidify slightly. His glow became a little brighter. "It's working," Lisa said in amazement. "The processing is breaking down the toxic compounds into something they can use." Jake felt a surge of relief. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was keeping them alive. "Don't get too excited," he warned. "This is just buying us time. The machine is running on emergency power, and we don't have enough plant matter to keep this up forever." But at least they weren't dying anymore. The aliens were still weak, still in danger, but they were stable. Jake went back outside as the sun was setting. The desert was cooling down, and the first stars were beginning to appear. He had work to do. More plants to gather, more food to process. As he worked, he thought about the rescue ship that was supposed to be coming. It couldn't arrive soon enough. But until it did, he would keep fighting. He would keep his crewmates alive. The desert was harsh and unforgiving, but Jake had learned its secrets. He had found its hidden gifts, and he would use everything he had learned to save his friends. Behind him, the ship's lights glowed softly in the gathering darkness. Inside, 3 alien beings were drinking processed plant soup and slowly getting stronger. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Jake smiled and got back to work. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, everyone would live to see another day. Day 5 arrived with both hope and fear. Jake woke up to find his alien crewmates still alive, but barely. The plant soup had kept them from dying, but they were still desperately weak. Commander Zethic could sit up for short periods, but walking was impossible. Dr. Velix could move his arms, but couldn't stand. Navigator Quinn had stopped flickering, but his form was still dangerously thin. "The processing unit is running low on power," Lisa said, checking the makeshift machine. "Maybe another 6 hours, then it shuts down." Jake nodded grimly. He had been expecting this. The ship's emergency batteries wouldn't last forever. Once the power died, he would have no way to process the plants into something the aliens could digest. "Then we need to work fast," he said. Jake had been thinking about this problem all night. The plant soup worked, but it required too much energy to make. He needed a better solution, something that would keep working even after the power ran out. "I have an idea," he said, "but it's going to require some engineering." He spent the morning scavenging through the ship's wreckage, looking for specific parts. He found coils of metal tubing from the cooling system, heat exchangers from the engines, pumps from the water recycling unit, all broken but maybe repairable. "What are you building?" Lisa asked, watching him work. "A still," Jake said, connecting 2 pieces of tubing, "like the old moonshine makers used to build back on Earth." "A still? For what?" "To concentrate the nutrients from the plants. If I can distill the good stuff and leave behind the toxins, Maybe I can make something the aliens can digest without using so much power. Lisa looked doubtful. That's actually not a bad idea, but will it work? Only one way to find out. Jake had learned about distillation from his grandfather, who had made his own alcohol during the Prohibition era on Earth. The principle was simple: heat up a liquid until it becomes vapor, then cool the vapor back into liquid. Different compounds vaporized at different temperatures, so you could separate them. The hard part was building the equipment with what he had available. Jake worked through the heat of the day, welding and connecting and testing. His hands were burned and cut by the time he was finished, but he had created something that might work. "It's not pretty," he said, looking at his contraption, "but it should do the job." The still was a mess of twisted metal and jury-rigged connections. But it had all the essential parts: a heating chamber, a cooling coil, and a collection tank. Jake fired it up using the ship's emergency power, but once it was running, it would need only a small flame to keep going. "I can burn dried plant matter to keep the heat going," he explained to Lisa. "No electrical power needed." The first batch was a disaster. Jake fed plant matter into the heating chamber, but the temperature was wrong. The vapor that came out was thick and oily and smelled like burning plastic. When he tried to give it to Commander Zethic, the alien immediately spit it out. "That's worse than the original plants," Zethic said weakly, but Jake didn't give up. He adjusted the temperature and tried again. The second batch was better, but still not right. The third batch was starting to look promising. "The key is getting the temperature just right," he explained to Lisa. "Too hot and you break down the good nutrients. Too cool and you don't separate out the toxins." By late afternoon, Jake had produced a small amount of clear liquid that smelled faintly of herbs. He tested it on himself first, as always. It tasted like weak tea with a bitter aftertaste, but it seemed safe. "Commander, want to try this?" he offered. Zethic looked at the liquid suspiciously. "What is it?" "Concentrated plant extract. All the nutrients, none of the poison." The alien commander took a small sip. His eyes widened. It's not terrible," he said, "and I can feel it. My body is accepting it." Jake gave some to Dr. Velix, who managed to drink half a cup before his stomach rebelled. But even that small amount seemed to help. The insect alien's chitin began to look less dull. Navigator Quinn was still the biggest challenge. The ethereal being couldn't drink liquids any more than he could eat solids, but Jake had an idea for that too. "What if we turn it into vapor?" he suggested. "You can absorb energy from gas, right?" "In theory," Quinn replied in his whisper-soft voice, "but I've never tried to absorb nutrition that way." Jake rigged up a small vaporizer using parts from the ship's humidifier. He heated the plant extract until it became a fine mist, then directed it toward where Quinn was floating. The results were immediate. Navigator Quinn's form began to brighten and thicken. His blue glow returned, faint but visible. "It works," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "I can feel the energy flowing into me." Jake felt a surge of triumph. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was working. The aliens were getting stronger. They might actually survive. Until rescue arrived, but then the power went out. The ship's emergency lights flickered and died. The air recycling system shut down. The processing unit stopped working. In the sudden darkness, Jake could hear the aliens' breathing become labored again. "Emergency power is gone," Lisa said, her voice tight with worry. "The batteries are dead." Jake felt around in the darkness until he found his emergency flashlight. The beam of light showed 3 alien faces looking at him with desperate hope. "Don't worry," he said. "We don't need power anymore." He went outside and gathered dried plant matter to burn. The desert was full of dead branches and dried leaves that would make good fuel. He started a small fire under his still and watched. "The flames dance, the old ways," he said to himself. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." The still worked even better with the wood fire. The heat was more even, the temperature easier to control. Jake was able to produce a steady stream of concentrated plant extract that the aliens could digest. As the night wore on, he kept the fire burning and the still running. The aliens grew stronger with each dose of the extract. Commander Zethik was able to stand for short periods. Dr. Velix could move around the ship. Navigator Quinn was bright enough to provide light. How did you know how to do this? Lisa asked, watching Jake tend the fire. My grandfather, Jake said. He lived through the Great Depression on Earth. He knew how to make do with whatever was available. He taught me that civilization is just a thin layer over the old instincts. When things get tough, you have to remember how to survive. But the aliens have much more advanced technology than we do, Lisa pointed out. Their ships can cross the galaxy. Their computers can calculate things we can't even imagine. But they forgot how to eat weeds, Jake said simply. They forgot how to make fire. They forgot how to live off the land. As dawn approached, Jake looked at his crewmates. They were alive. They were getting stronger. They would survive until rescue came, and Jake had learned something important about the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Intelligence could build starships and computers, but wisdom knew how to make soup from weeds and keep a fire burning through the night. The desert was still harsh and unforgiving, but Jake had made it give up its secrets. He had turned a wasteland into a source of life. His grandfather would have been proud. The rescue ship arrived just as Jake was starting his morning fire. He heard the familiar hum of engines first, then saw the sleek vessel descending through the dawn sky. The ship was beautiful, all smooth curves and gleaming metal, nothing like the battered wreck they had been living in. They're here, Lisa shouted, though her voice was still weak from the ordeal. Jake looked up from where he was tending his still. The plant extract was bubbling noisily, and he had just finished preparing the morning doses for his crewmates. Commander Zethik was sitting up and looking almost normal. Dr. Velix was walking around the ship. Navigator Quinn was glowing bright blue again. Good timing, Jake said, wiping his hands on his pants. I was just about to serve breakfast. The rescue ship landed about 50 meters away, its engines kicking up clouds of red dust. The airlock opened and 4 figures emerged. Jake recognized the species immediately, 2 Korthani like Commander Zethik, a Chitauri like Dr. Velix, and something he had never seen before, a tall, crystalline being that moved with fluid grace. Emergency Response Team Alpha 7, the lead. Korthani announced through his suit's speakers. We received your distress beacon. Are there any survivors? 5 survivors, Commander Zethik called back, his voice much stronger than it had been yesterday. All alive and stable. The rescue team hurried toward the crashed ship, carrying medical equipment and emergency supplies. They stopped short. When they saw the makeshift camp Jake had created outside the wreck, there was the still burning merrily with its collection of tubes and coils. There were neat piles of processed plant matter. There were drying racks where Jake had been preparing different types of vegetation. And there was Jake himself, looking healthier than he had when they first crashed. What is all this? The lead rescuer asked, staring at the setup. Breakfast, Jake said simply. He ladled some of the plant extract into a cup and offered it to Commander Zethik. Drink up. You need to keep your strength up. The rescue team watched in amazement as all 3 alien survivors accepted food from Jake's improvised kitchen. They drank the plant extract without hesitation, their bodies clearly benefiting from the nutrition. I don't understand, the Chitauri rescuer said. Our sensors showed this planet as completely barren, Class 7 desert world. No edible vegetation for any known species. No edible vegetation for any known species, Jake corrected. But plenty of food if you know how to prepare it. The crystalline being spoke for the first time, its voice like wind chimes. You are the human? I'm Jake Peterson, ship's engineer, Jake said. These are my crewmates. We have heard about humans, the being said, but the stories seemed impossible. No species should be able to survive on raw planetary matter. Not raw, Jake said, stirring the still. Processed, refined, concentrated. Just like any other food, really. The medical team began examining the survivors. They ran scans and took readings, their equipment beeping and humming. After several minutes, the lead medic looked confused. These readings don't make sense, he said. According to our instruments, these three should be dead. They've been without proper nutrition for 5 days. They had nutrition, Jake said. Just not the kind they're used to. But our biological databases show that none of these plant species are compatible with Corthony, Chitauri, or ethereal physiology. Jake shrugged. Your databases are wrong. The rescue team spent the next hour trying to understand what had happened. They examined Jake's still, analyzed his plant extracts, and questioned the survivors about their experience. The human saved our lives, Commander Zethic told them. When our food ran out, he found a way to make the local plants edible. Without him, we would have died on the second day. Impossible, the Chitauri medic muttered. The alkaloid levels in these plants should have killed you instantly. Would have, Dr. Velix agreed. But the human's distillation process removes the toxins while concentrating the nutrients. It's actually quite brilliant. Navigator Quinn floated over to join the conversation. The human demonstrated capabilities we did not know existed. He survived and thrived in conditions that would kill most civilized beings. The crystalline being studied Jake with what might have been curiosity. You ate the raw plants as well? Sure, Jake said. They're not that bad once you get used to them. The cactus pads are pretty good, actually. Taste kind of like green beans. You ate them raw? The being's voice went up an octave. Without processing? I processed them in my stomach, Jake said. With a grin. That's what stomachs are for. The rescue team exchanged glances. Jake could tell they were having trouble believing what they were hearing. Perhaps we should return to the ship, the lead rescuer said. You all need proper medical attention. As they packed up to leave, Jake took one last look around his desert camp. It had been harsh and uncomfortable, but he had made it work. He had turned a death trap into a survival situation. Are you going to leave all this? Lisa asked, gesturing to the still and the plant stockpiles. No point in taking it, Jake said. But maybe someone else will crash here someday. They'll know that it's possible to survive. The trip back to the rescue ship was quick. Jake helped his crewmates aboard, making sure they were comfortable in the medical bay. The ship's automated systems immediately began providing proper nutrition and medical care within hours. Commander Zethic was looking like his old self again. Dr. Velix was clicking happily as his strength returned. Navigator Quinn was glowing, so brightly that he had to dim himself to avoid blinding the crew, but Jake noticed that the rescue team kept staring at him. They watched him eat the ship's food with the same amazement they had shown when he was eating weeds. Is there a problem? He asked. We've never seen anything like what you did down there, the crystalline being said. Our species has been traveling space for thousands of years. We have encountered hundreds of different worlds, but none of us could have survived what you survived. It wasn't that hard, Jake said. You just have to be willing to try new things. But you thrived, the being insisted. You didn't just survive, you flourished. You were healthier when we found you than when you crashed. Jake thought about that. It was true. The physical activity and the variety of nutrients from the wild plants had actually made him feel better than he had in months aboard the ship. Maybe that's the difference, he said. Humans are used to making do with whatever is available. We've been doing it for thousands of years. Word of Jake's survival spread quickly through the galactic community. By the time they reached the nearest space station, Jake found himself something of a celebrity. Scientists wanted to study his digestive system. Military strategists wanted to learn his survival techniques. Xenobiologists wanted to understand how he had processed the plants. I keep telling them it's not that complicated, Jake complained. To Lisa over dinner in the station's mess hall. You find food, you eat it, end of story. It's more than that, Lisa said. You represent something they've never seen before. A species that can adapt to almost any environment. Around them, Jake could see other diners watching him eat his salad. They seemed fascinated by the simple act of consuming vegetables. It's just food, he said. To you, maybe. But to them, you're eating things that would kill them. You're doing the impossible. Jake looked around the mess hall. There were dozens of different species represented: reptilian Corthony, insectoid Chitauri, gaseous ethereals, crystalline beings whose names he couldn't pronounce, all of them highly advanced, all of them capable of crossing the galaxy, but none of them could eat a weed. You know what's funny? Jake said. They think I'm some kind of superhuman because I can digest cellulose. But back on Earth, that's just called being human. Lisa laughed. Maybe that's what makes us special. We don't think we're special. Later that evening, Jake was approached by a delegation of scientists and military officials. They wanted to offer him positions, research opportunities, and training programs. The Galactic Defense Force could use someone with your survival skills, a Corthony admiral said. You could teach our troops how to operate in hostile environments. The Scientific Council wants to study your digestive processes, a Chitauri researcher added. You could help us develop new food processing techniques. Jake listened politely to all their offers. They were generous and exciting opportunities. But in the end, he declined most of them. I appreciate the interest, he said, but I'm just an engineer. I fix things. That's what I want to keep doing. The only offer he accepted was a simple one, a recommendation that survival training become mandatory for all interspecies crews. Not high-tech survival, but basic skills: how to find water, how to identify edible plants, how to make fire. The old skills, Jake called them. The ones that kept our ancestors alive before we had machines to do everything for us. 6 months later, Jake was back on a ship, traveling between star systems and fixing broken equipment. But now every crew he worked with included emergency survival training. They learned to identify edible plants on different worlds. They practiced making fire without technology. They studied how to process raw materials into food. Most of them would never need these skills. But if they ever found themselves stranded on a desert planet with nothing but weeds to eat, they would remember the human who had shown them it was possible. Jake kept a small collection of seeds,